Business opportunities in West Africa are very diverse. They differ quite a bit from East Africa actually. So what we see going on in West Africa is a lot of oil dependency. We've got a strong, sophisticated consumer group and a consumer group who's becoming increasingly tech savvy. So it's very interesting to see how these consumers are moving. We see our retailers going into the space. We see a lot of our business services companies, such as our financial services companies, insurance companies, but we also see a lot of our telecoms companies that have gone into the West African continent. What we also see is the retail banking guys moving in there with applications that are more suited to the mobile savvy consumers, particularly if we look at the Nigerian market or even the Ghanaian market. So it's a very interesting and very diverse consumer market in West Africa. What we also see is a lot of construction happening in West Africa as well. And the telecommunication is already developing. We've got a lot of mobile users in that space. So we already see that construction and infrastructure development will be coming off the back of a lot of the already growing ICT space in the West African continent, or the West African part of the continent. Typically, business from the Western Cape, we are a little bit too anglicized in the way we do our business. So we need to understand that the West African way of doing business is not necessarily the same as ours. So we need to be mindful of that, and we need to be respectful of that as well. So we can just break those perceptions and those barriers amongst ourselves. So another area where we really need to look at in terms of pitfalls is that there's still a lot of informal markets in Nigeria, for example. The retail space isn't as developed yet, so you're going to have a lot of competition in those markets, because where those guys don't necessarily have the operating costs, so they can compete on price. So, we're going to be seeing a lot of price point competition, especially when we're going to be exporting to those markets, and then we're going to really be having to rely on our partnerships in those markets to make sure that we have competitive pricing. The sectors where we see a lot of growth in Africa, fast-moving consumer goods, specifically food and beverages, as well as other consumer goods. We're talking about semi-durable goods, and then obviously the non-durable goods. So we also see a lot of growth going into infrastructure spending, which will be very limited, but we see manufacturing growth, and that for the Western Cape is very important, because we're going to be seeing supplying into the construction and infrastructure growth. And then also other sector that we need to maybe just keep an eye on is the rest of the manufacturing sectors. So as those sectors begin to grow, we'll see how those become touch points along the value chain for Western Cape companies. One of the key messages I have about Africa in general is that Western Cape companies need to really assess where they fit into the value chain when they look at Africa. West Africa in general has also got their own specific value chains, and those need to be assessed. So when it comes to West Africa, there needs to be exploration of those different markets. It's not a question of listening to me on a video or looking at desktop research, but it is very important to go to those African markets and really get a sense of what's going on in those markets. What is also very important, particularly when doing business in West Africa, the Francophone countries, is to form partnerships with businesses there. And that's going to be a critical element to doing business in West Africa. You need to get a feel for the market, you need to understand the market. You need to obviously understand the market in terms of doing your market research, yes, but that primary research is going to be extremely important, and you need to grow those relationships over quite a number of months or even a couple of years, so that you can really get into the grips of understanding the market, particularly for smaller companies. You don't want to make unnecessary mistakes as well. It's also important to really get to understand what's going on for other Western Cape companies and what their experiences have been in West Africa, because those linkages will also be important for you, so that you can grow with your counterparts and not as your competitors. So those are very, very important things when looking at West Africa. I think what we're looking at is a market with a lot of opportunity. So there's no right or wrong answer. It's about finding where you fit into that market and where your place is going to be. Looking at global value chains is become one of the most important ways of doing business across the globe. And West Africa is no different. So it's become really, really important to assess where you fit into that global value chain in Africa, and obviously in West Africa specifically.